the time of the Newsom-Trump row, there were warnings then. You had Gavin Newsom saying it's going to start here and then it's going to be rolled out against the rest of the country. Now, the circumstances are a little bit different in this case. But of course, I think this is a mode where Donald Trump is quite happy at installing it.
Look, you moved to Washington, a few months ago. Have you noticed crime being horrific in Washington, D.C.?
I think there's definitely certain areas around Washington, D.C. or within Washington, D.C. where it can be quite sketchy in the evening. Also, we have seen reported crime, if you think about individual cases recently that have had a lot of attention in the press. So, for example, Donald Trump was very animated about Big Balls, is the nickname, the former Doge employee, a 19-year-old who was a victim of crime in the past week or so, which is one of the things that's focused his mind. Now, of course, seeing crime and knowing there are parts of a city which you would go to or you would try and avoid at certain times, that's a common theme in lots of cities around the world, of course. And I think the question really is the crime as bad as Donald Trump says it is? He's saying, DC is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. Or when you look at some of the crime statistics, which the Democrats will say in return, will say, well, actually, crime's on the decrease on these metrics, so this isn't all quite fair. But I suspect one of the reasons Donald Trump's so keen to have this conversation and chose to have this long press conference I attended in the White House briefing room is as soon as the Democrats are really debating how much crime there is, they're in a tricky space anyway. And I think this is a political fight Donald Trump wants to have.
I mean, the stats that the Democrats are handing out are that crime has actually dropped, in some cases, 25, 30%. In Washington, D.C. and other areas of the country. Has Donald Trump put forward any statistics that can stand up to why he is... I mean, this is quite serious. He is putting the Washington Police Department under direct control of the military. The National Guard is coming in, putting boots on the ground. Is he backing this up with anything that can be stood up?
He's citing more individual cases. So I mentioned Big Balls, the Doge employee. You also had a worker on the Hill who was leaving a train station a few weeks ago and was shot because the thinking is they got caught in gang fire. They were not the intended recipient. They were not meant to be the victim. And this person passed away. So I think what you can say he can speak to is individual incidents that people in the city have heard about, read about, and make them feel less safe. That's, of course, different than saying what is the overall trend. But, of course, also in the UK, there's a big conversation at the moment where you have Nigel Farage saying, well, lawless Britain, it's never been worse. And then you have some figures, including my Times colleague, Fraser Nelson, writing these pieces saying, actually, look at the stats. Crime isn't as bad as you think if you look on these metrics. So I don't think that's a like-for-like comparison by any means, but I think, of course, your lived experience and what you feel where you're at doesn't always reflect what the national trend is, depending on how you look at things. I think it's certainly a fight that is falling on political party lines. So Republicans are, tonight and this morning, really leaning into the sense of if anyone dares to say, oh, well, I live in DC and I haven't seen much crime, that means that you're out of touch, deluded, perhaps living in the poshest area, and you don't have a right to that experience to share it. So those people being shouted down, whereas the Republicans saying, of course, it's more dirty, everyone knows that, is anecdotal. But again, I think that the reason Donald Trump has decided to do this is to have the Democrats playing down crime in any way, because some people will have experienced it, they think is a comfortable place for them, one they can keep pushing. Particularly, you look at Democrats in some blue states over the years on governance and crime.
Katy, he mentioned that this was almost like a test case, and if proved successful, this could be rolled out to other cities across the US. He mentioned Chicago, Los Angeles, democratic cities. Is there a scenario where all of a sudden we're going to see boots on the ground in Los Angeles?
Well, of course, we have already seen that to a degree. If we think about a few months ago when there was the fight on Gavin Newsom obviously kicking back, and Donald Trump brought in the National Guard in response to protests, which caused, a big row in California about whether this was needed. Similar lines to the Democrats saying that Donald Trump was an authoritarian who was being, anti-democratic. So there is a tendency from this White House to ultimately go for the law and order option and the extreme law and order option when they want to make a point. And at the time of the Newsom-Trump row, there were warnings then. You had Gavin Newsom saying it's going to start here and then it's going to be rolled out against the rest of the country. Now, the circumstances are a little bit different in this case. But of course, I think this is a mode where Donald Trump is quite happy at installing it. Of course, there are some specific differences when it comes to DC. The fact that DC has the Home Rule Act and so forth, that means that DC is fairly unique. But we know when it comes to a playbook, this is something that Trump is quite comfortable doing if he feels that he has cover to do it.
The Democrats, of course, are also saying that, look, these draconian measures are part of Donald Trump's attempt to distract from a big story that he's been trying to get away for the last few weeks, which is the Epstein files. Where are we with those files? And is it a legitimate criticism that this is all a distraction?
I think in politics, and I would say, as you say, I've been in Washington for 3 months now, and I had 10 years in Westminster. If there is an uncomfortable story for a political leader, you can say, whenever they talk about anything else or try to get something to talk about, you can obviously logically say, well, of course they're doing this. And it's the dead cat strategy, as Linton Crosby once called it, where, you throw something out there to distract, okay? I think at the same time, it can be the case that Donald Trump thinks this is a good news story for him. He thinks there's been recent events such as Big Balls, how he's looking at things, which means he wants to take action, but it's one where the Republicans are comfortable. And also at the same time, did he sit there and think, how do I get people to stop talking about Epstein for a day? I'm going to have this press conference. I suspect it's nothing as blunt as that. But of course, if you can get voters and the public focusing on the issues that you would rather talk about, generally speaking, that's a political tactic and one politicians use all the time. I think when it comes to where the Epstein files saga is at the moment, you had Donald Trump, after initially obviously saying that everyone needed to get over talking about Jeffrey Epstein. It was boring. Then they petitioned a judge to open the files. The judge has now refused that. And I think we're heading to a point where it really comes probably back to September when Congress returns as to what steps politicians try to take. J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's deputy, was saying recently in an interview that Donald Trump wants full transparency, so do I. And that does suggest that they're not getting full transparency right now. And there's going to be a push, not just from the Democrats, but I think more importantly, Republicans who want to see Donald Trump do a bit more. So where does he go now that the court route hasn't worked?
And Katy, you were in the room yesterday. There was a moment where Donald Trump was addressing his meeting with Vladimir Putin that's coming up on Friday. Now, he said, I'm going to be going to Russia. He's not going to Russia, is he? He's going to Alaska, is he not?
Yeah, as far as we know, and
right,
there are
plans haven't changed.
no plans for the meeting to move from Alaska to Russia. So it seems as though the president was misspeaking. Of course, it could be that there is another trip to Russia because this meeting is going to be the beginning of a series of meetings. We know one of the meetings Trump would like to have would then be Putin and Zelensky. Now, that would be very, very unlikely to take place in Russia if you think about the Ukrainian view. But yes, it did feel as though he was misspeaking. And that wasn't after that any correction coming saying, oh, actually, the venue's changed. He was giving you all a scoop.
And was there any hint in that press conference yesterday that Volodymyr Zelensky will be anywhere near Alaska whilst these talks are taking place?
No, and I think the comments from Donald Trump on Ukraine probably raised more questions than they provided answers. When he was talking ahead of the summit, because he said, well, I could tell him just, keep fighting, good luck, or I could come to a compromise and I'll know after 2 minutes. And he was really trying to keep everyone guessing, both the press who were assembled and I think Putin and Zelensky. However, the one thing I think he was much clearer on is there had been talk from some figures linked to the administration, some anonymous White House officials, some ambassadors, that there was a chance Zelensky could be added at the last minute. Now, nothing is impossible, but the way Donald Trump was talking, it was that it would be himself and Putin, but he said out of respect, Zelensky would probably be the first person who'd call after the meeting. And then he added that he hoped the next meeting would be Putin and Zelensky. Now, he was also quite critical of Zelensky in that meeting, being negative about Zelensky's handling of the war and so forth, some of his comments. So I don't think if you were the Ukrainian side watching the press briefing, you would have had that much reassurance from it compared to what they are hoping for.